What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Long Game Podcast hosted by Thomas Kopelman and Jacob Turner. In each episode, you'll hear us break down financial topics that are relevant to you and your situation. Our goal is to help bring credible financial information to you in short, bite-sized episodes.
All opinions expressed on this show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on the Long Game Podcast should be considered advice. Always consult with your team of professionals before making any decisions regarding your finances. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Thomas Kopelman, and I'm super excited about today's topic because I think one of the biggest areas of need that I see in the financial advice industry is a lack of transparency. We need more of it. So in today's episode, me and Thomas are going to be diving into what do we do around our own money? How do we manage it? How do we think about budgeting? How do we think about investing? What do we actually invest in? So Thomas, I don't know about you, but I'm really excited to talk today.
Me too, man. I think especially this one will be fun. I've written about this. I've done a podcast on it. A lot has changed in the last year with how I manage my finances and some of the decisions that I've made, but I also think it'll be fun to kind of hear from you too, of things that you did with your money before you were a financial advisor as an athlete, and now what you currently do. And I'm sure there's a lot of similar themes for how you and I manage money. I mean, I think a big reason why we joined together to do this podcast is we do think pretty similarly. I mean, we're financial planners. We understand, I would like to think we understand really well how to manage our money. I mean, that would be the hope if we're going to help everybody else manage their own money. But I'm curious to see maybe some of the differences that we have as well.
Yeah, well, I think one of them that we've even talked about privately that is unique is how we even budget our money, right? I think everything starts from how you think about budgeting, whether it's, I know you talk about reverse budgeting. I do it more traditionally, but ultimately you need to understand where your money's going from a cash flow standpoint. So for me, I think my intro into budgeting is really unique because everybody talks about automation. But when I first started with money as an 18-year-old kid, it was a ton of anxiety around like making sure I did it right. So instead of using any automation, like literally what I used was there's an app or software on Mac called Numbers, which essentially is like an Excel version of Mac. And I would go in there. Yeah, it's like a bad version of Excel. And what I would do is I would go in there and I would categorize like every single transaction I had. So I'd try to spend everything on a credit card, and then I would go back and I would actually categorize the different transactions in there. I did this for years. Like I probably still have these Numbers documents. And what was interesting was it actually made me spend way less money because I can remember being at a store and being like, you know what, I'm not going to buy anything because I don't want to go into Numbers and actually have to categorize this. And obviously it's since transitioned from them, but I'm curious if we both think about budgeting or money management, income as it's coming in as the foundational element of this, how do you think about how you manage it with your own finances and why reverse budgeting?
Yeah, well, I think we're in different situations, right? You had a mortgage, you're married, you have multiple kids. Like there's a lot more expenses that probably come up in your day-to-day than come up in my day-to-day in the situation that I manage. Like, so I'm getting married this year. We just combined finances here in January. So I think that changes things a little bit. But, for me, when I first graduated, things were very simple, right? I have a really cheap rent, I spend a little bit on groceries and I go do some fun things with my friends. Like I don't really spend any money other than that because I'm like, you don't have that much money. And I think a good learning part for me is when I joined Justin, when I left Thrivent, I had a bunch of job offers. I was like, Justin, I want to work for you. I asked him to pay me $2,000 a month. I was like, he was saying no to hiring me. He's like, I don't really want to hire people. I'm like, I don't care about money. Like, I just want to learn. And because I asked for such a little bit amount of money, I didn't spend money during that time, right? Like I would still go to dinner with my fiance girlfriend at the time, but I didn't really buy things. So it really taught me to be like, hey, I have groceries, I have food, I do whatever. I'm not really spending a lot of money. And so I didn't really have to track that much because I just really said no to most things. But I knew it was a short-term period of time to say no. And now being at the point where, I literally, obviously take home almost 20 times the amount that I was making back then, I went from like, hey, I make a little and I spend a little to now I grew my income such a significant amount where reverse budgeting works really well for me because I'm still not a big spender. Like we go to nice restaurants, we do the things that we want to do. I save for travel monthly. So like, it's not like, well, hey, hopefully I don't spend too much here. I already allocated those dollars. But having such a large surplus, the margin for error for me, I've decided isn't worth tracking, right? Because if I spend a little bit more in restaurants that month, or I buy a couple more things, that's probably the difference of $1,000. And, I typically hold about 10 or 10,000 ish extra as a buffer in my checking account, knowing that I'm not a big spender. And so I really don't spend that much time reviewing my spending unless I was like, whoa, like my account should say 15,000. It has two, like there's an error here. So I let that checking balance be the check-in for me of, hey, I'm spending too much. I need to make a change or not. And just naturally who I am with my income grows almost every single month and my spending doesn't. Most of the time it's the opposite where I have extra money and I even just go invest more.
I think it's a good point you make that a lot of times it comes from the stage of life you're at, but it probably also comes for me personally. Like I love seeing the data over years. So when I switched from using essentially Excel spreadsheets to some sort of automation, I started using Mint. And I used Mint all the way up until this year when they ended up moving to a different company and I didn't want to use them anymore. And now I use Monarch Money. So Monarch Money, shout out to them, is awesome. It's like $99 and it's way better than Mint. So I'm glad I switched to them. But it's really cool for me to be able to go back. I can go back years and see what did I spend on this 7 years ago. And I personally just like that. But I like it more so because it just gives me peace of mind over anything else. And like you said, I have 4 kids now. My wife and I spend money on vastly different things. So it's really helpful for me to be able to go in there and see what are we spending money on. The other thing that I would say that it helps with, and I think this alludes to the point that you made, is it helps me not worry about some of the stuff that is really on the fringes. Oftentimes we focus so much on saving an extra dollar. You'll see things on Twitter that says, well, if you didn't buy that coffee and you invested all that money for the last 40 years, here's how much money you have. And the reality is like things like that don't really move the needle. But for me, I like having just a clear picture of like, where's all the different money going in the different budgets or different categories that I have. And I found even with Monarch, I mean, I spend one Saturday every 2 weeks. It usually takes me 5 to 10 minutes to categorize the transactions because most of them have a rule. So it's kind of like QuickBooks. And then it's a super easy way for me to be able to get a snapshot of like where I'm at from a spending perspective.
Yeah, I'll say I actually just did this in Right Capital. So in Right Capital with our clients, we have a feature, you turn the budget on, we can just go categorize it. And to me, what I look at is like trailing 3 months average expenses. And I say, here's my income, here's my last 3 months expenses. How does that look? And for the last while for me, it's like I'm saving and investing double my monthly expenses. So when I know that, it's like, okay, well, I don't really have too much concern, but it's important for me to know because we get our mortgage starts in April. So we bought a place that's going to raise my monthly expenses by a little over $2,000. And then I sold my car. Well, I basically gave my car to my fiance, sold her car, and I leased a Tesla. I wanted a new car. It was the only way for me to really get the tax credit. And so I was like, okay, that's going to be $500 a month pre-selling her car, right? Like you factor that in. I was like, it's going to be like $250 a month for a 3-year lease. Seems like something that I should do, but having those numbers allowed me to be able to make these decisions, right? I knew, okay, hey, if I increase our mortgage by 2,000, I do this by about $500. Great. Now, what does my monthly expenses look like? What does my monthly surplus look like? And then I go look at the business. And what I know is we have reoccurring revenue and then we have one-off expenses. So we have like financial plans that are done. And like, I might look back and say, hey, I'm averaging $6,000 to $8,000 a month of added revenue from there. But I want to assume that none of that's happening. What is like the bare minimum I'm going to make on a monthly basis relative to adding those expenses? And is that surplus still enough for what I want? I will say working with some of the clients that I work with has really pushed me to maybe think of money in a different way, right? Like a bunch of years ago, the average person I worked with was maybe investing, $1,000 a month was like a good, they're doing well, or $2,000 a month, like, wow, they're a lot. And now working with other people, I have clients who are investing $500,000 a year. And so then I look at small dollar amounts and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to invest. So my goal this year is I want to invest $100,000. quite a bit. I definitely think it's something that I'm gonna be able to do. I tried to make my decisions on what my expenses are to make sure I can max my 401k. My fiance can max her 401k. We just did that episode in Roth versus traditional, right? I'm doing Roth. Even though I know I'm going to be in the 35% tax bracket, I'm doing Roth because I'm so young. The power of tax-free money for 40 years from now, I think is really impactful, knowing that I can still afford those taxes out of pocket. And I know I'll be in the 37% bracket next year and every year above that. So my thought is if I can get $250,000 or more in Roth by my early 30s, that's going to be really, really powerful. And I'll do Roth conversions down the line. Then, I maxed out her backdoor Roth for last year, did both of our backdoor Roths to already start this year. And then that basically means I need, $2,500 a month to go to a taxable account to hit that number. And my goal is to even do significantly more than that. But I'm like, if I do that, all spending outside of that's fine. I know myself. It's not like I'll go buy something that's $5,000 because I can and I have the extra money. But at least for me, as being not a spender, it helps me become more of a spender by actually just tracking the savings and investments, not really the expenses.
Yeah, well, I want to put a bow on what you said there, but I want to make sure listeners understand we're going to talk about tax planning because I want to talk about the Roth side because I'm a huge believer in this. But in terms of spending, I'm not much of a spender either. And one of the things that budgeting's really helped me with is what I would call guilt-free spending. Before, I would have this money coming in and there would be maybe a surplus there. I'd done a good job saving. But then when it came time to spend it, I would either not do it, or when I did do it, I would either feel like guilty about it, or I'd be on the trip and be like, well, I don't want to do the extra thing on the vacation. And the reality is like having the budget there and seeing that like, okay, no, I have this money earmarked for this. I've planned around it. For me personally, has given me a ton of freedom around it. And I see that a lot with clients that we work with where they have more money than they realize. And really part of my job is to help them figure out how they want to spend it and spend it in a way that they feel really good about spending it. Because, it sounds like a first world problem, but I think this is true for a lot of people that have excess money. Whether you're making $100,000 or you're making $1 million, you can be in that scenario where you've saved really what you need to save for your future, but then you have this excess money there and you're saying, do I want to spend it? Do I want to reward myself? And sometimes you just ultimately keep saving it and it's to your own detriment.
Yeah, it's something that surprised me a little bit, but I mean, at the end of the day, not really. That I have two very extreme sides of clients, right? I have some clients who are making $750,000 a year, nothing to show for it, right? Like I have a new client that I'm sitting down with. I know he made $1.4 million last year, and he has low six-figure savings and investments in pretty far along in life. Like, okay, we have a spending problem. We need to work on this. And then I have some other clients who are like 30 plus million net worth and they can't get themselves to buy clothes anywhere other than Target. And it's like, well, we probably need to work on this too, because you have way too much money. And I get maybe if clothes isn't your thing, but you should be spending some more money on things that you do enjoy. And we'll work together to figure those out. But I think that was the important thing for me is like, what are the things that I really do like to spend on? And those are the things I actually have been able to carefree do. And I think Money Twitter and everywhere else tries to tell you what the okay things are. And that's what I think is wrong, right? Like on there, you better be driving a Toyota Camry, right? Like, and that's, if you're driving a nicer car, that is so stupid of you to do, right? And I'm like, okay, well, it's not like my car is super expensive. It, maybe at the least it'll be $300 a month, but like, I don't feel bad about it. Like it's actually one of the big purchases I made where I didn't have buyer's remorse for even a second. I like to spend on golf with my friends, right? I think golf is a great way to spend time with your adult male friends, be outside, not just get a beer somewhere. I like living in a nice place. It's not like I bought, a $2 million place, but we were able to custom build it. It's going to be super nice. We'll have good furniture in there. I'm not a big like spender on clothes. Like I almost never really spend money on clothes unless my fiance's like, you need this new clothes for, this event. And like, I end up letting her convince me on that. And I do like to go on like do good experiences. So that's travel and like go to nice restaurants, but all within reason, right? Like as long as we have that money, I know those are the categories that kind of fill my bucket. And the other thing is I like giving gifts to people like my nieces and nephews every birthday, every holiday, like we get them stuff. Like I want to get my parents a nice present. those are the things that I know make me happy. And then I know the areas that don't, and I just don't focus too much there. Like I don't fly first class, right? Like we could fly first class on a flight. Most of the time I don't even pay for like exit row, right? Like I'm like, wherever I sit, I'm going to work and I'm going to get my work done. I'd much rather save the $600 and go to nicer restaurants while I'm there. Cause I'm going to be uncomfortable the whole flight regardless in my mind.
Yeah, my wife gives me a hard time because there's certain things that I'll spend any amount of money on, and there's other things that I just refuse to spend any money on. And much to your point, like even the exit row, I'm 6'5", and I'm like, it just doesn't really matter to me. And she's always like, well, what if we get like, we fly Southwest a lot out of St. Louis? She's like, what if you get the C boarding group? I'm like, I don't, doesn't really bother me. Like, I'm just going to do my thing anyways. I'm going to read my book or put in my headphones. It doesn't make any difference to me. But then when it comes to like actually the vacation that we're going to go on, like where we're going to stay at, I'll be like, no, I don't care what it costs. Like, this is where I want to stay. Because for me, it's like creating these memories. And I think some of it goes back to like what your own experiences have been in life. I can remember growing up, some of the experiences I remember the most of is like when my parents would take us on some really cool vacations. And I didn't really remember like what they bought for Christmas, right? But I do remember that we went on these vacations. So that's kind of been ingrained in my mind of like, okay, no, these are things that I really want to spend money on. So Thomas, you talked a little bit about Roth versus traditional. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest tax planning moves that you've done in your own personal life that you feel like will have the biggest impact on your future net worth?
Yeah, I think when I left Justin, I immediately converted my simple because I was like, hey, first year of starting my business, which was only 2 months plus that income, like that's going to be pretty low. So I did that. I do a Roth every single year. I didn't have a 401k except for like my, my other job at Wealth. Like I have full access to use their 401k with a match. So, in the beginning when I first started, 8 months ago, my income, I was making probably half on a monthly basis than I make now. Just because this last year of Wall Street and everything has been a ton of growth, like, very blessed and, couldn't have asked for a better last 1 year. But I started there and I was like, at the end of the year, I'm going to try to get as much as I possibly can in for Roth. And then this year I'm going to switch. That was my thought. And then I got here this year and, one of the advisors I partner with on some of our highest net worth clients, I really leverage him as kind of my financial advisor in like the questions I ask and the things that I think about. And he had a really good thought of like, hey, you're always going to be in the highest bracket. I know I'm a worker, so I don't see myself really retiring early. And if I can afford the taxes out of pocket, why not do Roth when I'm probably not going to be in the 37% bracket? Like I'll be in 35 most likely. And the power of Roth early is even more impactful. So my thought is, well, if we both do 23, that's 46. I did her Roth at the start of this month. So, and then her 2024 as well. So that means, in this calendar year, we'll do $76,000 of Roth money. If you future value that 40 years from now, I think it'd be hard to see that and be like, no, I don't think that's a good move.
Yeah.
And I think if I was 38 versus 28, I think that's the time frame when it starts to switch, right? Like you're in a pretty high bracket, traditional starts to make more sense the older you get. And for him and I, we kind of went through some analysis and my thought was later 30s is probably when I'll do it. So that means if I do 70K a year for the next 10 years, plus what I already have, I should have in the millions by the, 1 million plus my early 40s. I mean, right.
Yeah,
so now you do a couple compounds out, you potentially could have like $8 million in a Roth account by the time I retire. I think I'd be pretty happy with that situation. I think that was the big part is like, if I did traditional, it does give me some options. I can do some Roth conversions, but am I going to be mad by doing Roth? And the thought was, I don't think there's any way that I'd be mad, especially with the business I'm building. There's a potential future where that becomes really sellable. Like I think I'm going to have plenty of dollars down the line. And I'll have plenty of pre-tax. I'm going to have plenty of taxable dollars too, which means no matter how I invest that, there's going to be a lot of income coming off of that portfolio if it's pretty big, where you're probably always going to be in a pretty high tax bracket. Like I have a new client I was sitting down with, they have 7-8 million, and that's still going to spit out $150,000 to $200,000 a year of gains in income. So think about if that's way bigger, how much tax and how much is your income rate going to be at that period of time?
Yeah, I think that's what most people, it's very hard for them to look out 10 or 20 years in the future or 30 years in the future and see what their income or their wealth accumulation is actually going to be at that point. I think it's smart of you to be able to think about that today.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's that. And then the leftovers all go to my taxable account. Like I would love, to be honest, to be able to do a mega backdoor Roth, but that's not an option at Wealth. And then, I'm probably going to set up my 401k this year, but I asked my full-time hire, like, would you rather me give you a bonus or a salary increase, or would you rather me add a 401k with a match? Because it would be a similar amount for like your 6 month, hire of kind of a promotion. And he was like, let me think about it. I have a wedding this year, blah, blah, blah. So I'm waiting to see, but I'd have to find a good 401k that offers a mega backdoor option. And then I'd potentially, instead of doing a taxable account, because that's where most of my money still is right now, is I would do a mega backdoor Roth and get even more in at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think similarly, like everything I do from a tax planning standpoint is like paying the taxes now. And I just feel strongly about that because I want to have control over my future tax bill. But much like you, I focused so much on Roth over the past really 5 years, but really ever since I got drafted. I've done a backdoor Roth essentially every single year for the last, 16 years. And then when I got done playing baseball, we had an MLB 401k, which was an amazing plan. They contributed almost up to the max every single year on the team contribution side. I rolled that into an IRA and then have been converting essentially all that money into Roth over the past couple of years when I feel like I'll be in the lowest tax bracket of my life over essentially the last 3 years. And it's only going to go up from here. So much like you, if I can pay the taxes today and I can let the growth continue to compound tax free, that's what I want to do, even if the tax bill doesn't feel real comfortable to pay it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just the power of doing it early is something that I definitely don't want to overlook. I'll say, some of the other things money management wise for me, I think the way that you manage your money in your business is very different person to person, situation to situation, right? Like I'm doing a financial plan right now for one of our ongoing clients for their annual review, and he needs to hold an insane amount of money in his business. Why? They do 80% of their revenue and profit in 2 months of the year. So knowing that, right, you have to be able to weather lower periods of times where you do a lot of ad spend versus me, my business is all reoccurring, right? Like if I look back trailing every month, my subscription revenue is higher every month. And then some months are a little higher, a little lower based on one-time plans and things that we do. But I don't really have a big reason to hold a lot of cash. And Trayton and I are the two owners. I own most of it. He owns some. We're an S Corp. So really, with most of the revenue being mine, if I hold a lot of profit in the business, that flows through to his tax return. So most of it gets paid out to me in salary, which, I probably need a reasonable salary above the Social Security wage base anyways for where we're at. So it's not like I miss out on a lot of tax planning by doing this, but I pay almost everything out per year in salary. And then he does marketing work and some other things. And so then like I'll pay him, we'll keep enough in that I can as profit that it'll flow through enough to pay him because he isn't doing as much financial planning work anymore. He's doing most of his work outside as a marketer. And I really don't hold extra money in the business because the only thing that really matters for me is if we had a really terrible month, like I would have to lose 50% of my clients to not actually probably 75% of my clients to only be able to pay myself as much as my monthly expenses are. And so I'm okay with my salary changing on a month to month basis. And so I don't hold much cash in the business at all. I would rather go put that to work somewhere else. So that's one thing that I do. If I owned a different business, it would be very different, but that's what works really well for us. And I just every month increase or decrease my salary minus expenses and revenue, right? Like that's the way that I handle it. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I would say I hold more money in the business, but I think about it a little bit differently just from the standpoint of the simplest way I think about businesses as a whole is like, are you either trying to create a cash flow machine or a growth business? And most financial advisory firms are cash flow, right? Like there's not a ton of reinvestment that you have to make. You can pull out the money, you could run at really high profit margins. And I think for me, I thought more about if I was pulling out the money and I was taking that money and investing it in something else, would the return on that investment be higher outside of my business or be higher inside of my business? So I very much thought about like, here's a reasonable number that I pay myself. Here's kind of what covers some of my expenses or all of my expenses from the business. And then really every other dollar, I'm saying like, let's either keep it back in there or let's find a way that we could potentially reinvest it back in the business for future growth. Because the way I look at it is that's almost one of my, if not my most tax efficient investment vehicles. If I can continue to grow the enterprise value of our company, and at some point that becomes really valuable, that's obviously growing tax deferred essentially the entire time it's grown. Whenever you go to sell a business like that, most of it's going to be capital gains income. So I'm saying, I think that's a really tax efficient way for me to potentially grow my total net worth. But I think ultimately, much to your point, Thomas, it depends on one, what you're trying to grow in the business, two, what type of business you have. And then three, I think it ultimately depends on if you have partners in the business, does everybody align on what that vision looks like in the future? Because the other thing I'll say from my personal standpoint in terms of how I invest money outside of my business, and this is a really simple thing, but I think it goes overlooked, is 90+% of my money is in taxable accounts. Just because there's restrictions on how much I could put into retirement accounts when I was coming up with baseball. So I have a lot of money in taxable accounts and always thinking about like, what is the most tax efficient way that I can potentially invest this money? So a lot of my money is in ETFs or index type funds where I can continue to grow the money and hopefully there's going to be no distributions at the end of the year, versus mutual funds. We're going to have capital gain distributions and I'm going to have this tax drag in the portfolio. And the other thing I think about is making sure that I'm buying things that I'm comfortable holding on to for, hopefully 30 plus years, because the reality is I don't want to be selling these investments. I want them to continue to compound on top of each other.
Yeah, I think you made a couple interesting points. And I think one thing to note, though, is we're in very different life stages, right? Like you have way more wealth built up than I do at this point. So I think extracting and building up this diversified side of my wealth building is really, really important. I think the other thing too is I've made all the hires that were on my time frame, right? Like I don't spend any money on marketing right now besides like a video editor. And right now we have too many prospects to manage. So I don't want to put any more money behind marketing. I have an assistant, I have my full-time hire, I have a part-time CFP. The next hire I would make is a full-time advisor that I could give clients to, but it's not on my radar right now because I don't actually know that's what I want, right? Like, do I want to manage other advisors and give them clients? I haven't made that decision. And even if I do, the more I build up my wealth now, the less I actually will need at that period of time, where then I could say, hey, I'm going to take away, $100,000 from me. I'm going to carve it out to somebody else. So I almost think we're thinking the same way, as in like, hey, whatever money that I need to fuel my business, like if I took away all my hires and those key expenses, right, I would make six figures, 100,000+ more. But I think I made those investments where until I know what that next one is. And my thought is the way to best set myself up for that hire is to have it to build my client base, right? Because if I bring on somebody, I'm like, you are going to work with equity compensation folks. I'm going to stick to only business owners. Well, if I have 50 clients that I can give them that are 2 to 3x what their salary is, that's a really easy decision for us to be able to make. And I can always scale back on my savings and investment rate for a year while I bring in more clients and source them more, if I've done that really well leading up to that.
Yeah, I think the goal for any entrepreneur, but any business owner, is to create optionality. And that optionality is different for everybody. And much like you said, like you want to have optionality outside of your business where you're creating wealth, which I think for me has always been a huge focus. Like I want to have, I call it throwing money over the wall, but I want to have, equity inside of my business that can continue to grow. But then I also want to have money outside of my business that has helped me build wealth. Because one of the biggest things that I see with entrepreneurs specifically is they get so far down the road and maybe the business is doing really well, but their lifestyle is really increased too. And the reality is the only way for them to continue living the same lifestyle that they were living is to sell the business at the right time for the right multiple to the right buyer and it all go perfect. And if you can throw money over the wall the entire time and be building essentially one bucket over here and then you have your business over here, you make sure that you create that optionality. And it really allows you to say like, okay, I'm not sure where I'm at today. I'm not sure where I'm going to be at tomorrow. But this optionality gives me the ability to say, I'm going to really throw fuel on the fire and really accelerate my business. Or, I really love what my business is doing now, and I don't really see a need to keep expanding it. I just want to keep making it a best-in-class offering.
I mean, I totally agree. I think the optionality is the big thing that I'm trying to plan for. And I'm not the person that says like, hey, only use the match in your 401k and prioritize taxable first. Cause again, like your Roth contributions are always there. So I don't know why you'd pick taxable over Roth if you can pull those contributions out. But, in my financial planning software and the things that I'm doing, I'm trying to set myself up where like I could be work optional at 35 or 40. will I do that? I would say there's like a 0.01% chance.
There's
right?
a 0% chance of you doing that.
Well, right. But here's the point one, right? Like you have a child who has a problem and you're like, hey, I want to be at home with them because they're sick, right? Or like, whatever those. So I'll give the 0.1% chance, but I definitely don't see that being a reality. But the optionality that you have, if like, I'm 35, I never need to save another dollar again, lets you do whatever you want. That could be me saying, I love what I do here, but I really want to take a step back. I'm still going to work here. I'm still going to create content, and I'm going to hire an advisor to oversee every client. And I'm just going to come to some meetings and have, I want to work 15 hours a week. And it's okay if, I make half as what I did, but I love this life, right? Like, I don't think that's what I'm going to want to do, but I think the best thing I could possibly do is let myself choose that, because I think when I look at my life as a business owner, I would say it's hard, right? Like I pretend a lot of times that like super easy, blah, blah, blah. Like being a business owner is hard. It's hard to be a financial advisor and deal with complexity. It's also hard to deal with managing a business and, the bunch of other things that are going on. But like, I think I have way more enjoyment in my life because I have 100% freedom to choose what I want, right? Like today, this is all I'm doing, right? I worked on client work. I didn't do a single client meeting. I'm doing 2 podcasts and I'm going to walk away from my day. Like I was looking forward to today, right? I don't know very many of my friends or anybody in my circle that really looks forward to their day-to-day work. And I'm trying to be intentional as I build to make sure I don't lose that. And that's why I don't know if I want to hire another advisor, right? Like what if I do and now I dread my days, right? If I make an extra $200,000 a year, it's not worth it. Because right now I have the combination of there's some days I dread, right? Like last week with annual reviews, I had 26 client meetings. That's a tough week. Like I'm not going to tell you that it was my favorite week of all time. This week I have like 14. I have barely any meetings today or tomorrow. And those other days I only have 3 or 4 meetings. It's perfect. And so I think it's really important to build your business around, especially service businesses like ours, around what do you want and what matters to you, and not giving up the love you have for that, because that's unique and it's rare. And, if you do have that, you're in a pretty lucky situation.
I think it's one of the advantages that we have in the business we're in, specifically with the folks that we get the opportunity to work with, is you get to see all these different businesses. And much like you said, like running a business is not easy. Anybody that says it is full of it. Like it's not easy. And you never really get to truly shut off, which I think is something that I know I did not fully grasp when I first started the business. But you also get to see all these different outcomes at all these different stages. We have entrepreneurs that are 25 years old. I have entrepreneurs that are 55 years old that are at vastly different stages, but I got to see like what their growth trajectory looked like. And you get to have those deeper conversations around, if you were going to do it all over again, would you do it that way? Or if you wouldn't do it that way, why wouldn't you do it that way? And I think much to your point, like we're talking about how we manage our own money, but money is only one component of this. And ultimately for me, like my whole goal with money is that it creates optionality, that it creates freedom of time, and it allows me to do the things that I want to do, which is what I feel like post baseball is like this really unique thing. Like I get to build a business and then do the things inside the business that I'm like, this is what I really want to do. And I think that's the ultimate, right? Like you could have the most money in the world, but if you hate going to work every day, it's not worth it.
Totally. And that's how I've made my hiring decisions, is what are the roles that I would love to take off my plate? And I've one by one hired the people to take those off my plate. And as I train them, what I'm training them to do is the things that, again, I don't really want to do. So like, I was meeting with my planner today and I'm like, when we show up for these planning meetings, here's everything I want done. So all we're doing is talking strategy. I don't have to do the back analysis. I don't have to look at their cash flow. I don't have to look at this. And I think that's really important and something that I focused on really from day one. But I think maybe the last thing to talk about here too, that I do with my own money, and that goes hand in hand with this, is like hiring out the things that I don't want to do. Right. So like, my taxes are taken care of. My new hire, he passed his EA. He's been doing tax filing. That's on your plate. Like you're going to do my taxes. I don't want to do that. Right. I hired the people. Video editing is something I don't want to do. Like I like writing, so I'm going to do that myself. When we move here, we're hiring a cleaning lady. Like I hired admin work to be covered. Like everything in my professional life that I personally don't want to do, or I'm not an expert in, I hire out, because I think this is the unique thing about being a business owner is every hour I have available to work is hours I can earn income, right? I even look at my one meeting, one plan financial model. I normally have a list of people who would take a spot if I would offer it. 2 hours, $1,500 right now, right? Like, why would I do anything else with 2 hours if I could pay somebody? It's going to take them 2 hours to clean or 2 hours of my time. It's going to be $200. That's an investment, right? Like, I view every decision through that lens. And I understand as an employee with a fixed salary, that isn't it. But for the business owners out there, that this is how you should be thinking about things, as especially when you're past like proof of concept, early income days. Like, every hour is an hour that you can generate revenue. And I'm not saying that as like, don't hang out with your kids or don't watch TV at night or don't watch sports. I'm just thinking about that in the hours that you can work, outsource things that you can make more money doing than what it would cost to outsource.
Yeah, you got to find a way. I always used to think that leverage was just around like taking out debt to buy real estate. Like people talk about leverage, but leverage is time and money, right? Like how do you best leverage your time and how do you best leverage your money? And for me, I'll never forget my dad he wouldn't hire anybody, right? Like nobody would ever come over to the house. He would do everything. He would mow the grass. My mom would clean the house. And me and my wife are essentially the opposite. I'm like, one of the best decisions I've ever made is like having somebody do the landscaping at our house. And then every Friday when I come home, like the grass got cut, the trees got trimmed. And like that's a huge investment for me because one, it's not cheap, but two, it saves me a bunch of time and it saves me a bunch of headspace too. And I think that's the other thing. There's obviously the money component, the time component, that, you know, the potential trade-off there in hiring somebody, but I think it also saves you just a ton of extra headspace knowing that, oh no, I hired a professional to do that. They're going to be doing that. I think it also ties in with why people hire financial advisors. You know, for us, like my dream outcome for a client is that when they lay their head on the pillow, they're like, no, we're good. Like we're a 10 out of 10 in our personal financial life. And I also don't have to take any headspace away to think about it. And I think about that with all the decisions we make. I mean, my wife and I were talking about the house cleaner that came over and cleaned our house and just how thankful we are that we have them to come over, because the reality is like they save us a lot of time. It saves my wife a ton of stress. And yeah, it saves us hours off our day.
Totally. Totally, man. Well, I think this has been an awesome episode. I know it's like a question a lot of people have is like, how do advisors manage their money? And I think this did a really good job of showing like not only how we manage it, but how we think about things. So I think this was a really good idea. I'm glad that you brought it up. There was one other thing that I really wanted to hit on before the end of this episode, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
I got a great one for us. You ready for it?
Yeah.
What is the biggest financial mistake or the silliest financial mistake you've ever made?
Oh man, that's a tough one, especially because I'm so early on, and with the lower income early on, I didn't make that many financial. You go. What you got to have one on your mind if you start.
All right, we can I could throw myself under the bus on this, but so my biggest financial mistake was, I remember when I first started investing money, I was a few years into it, and I started investing money in 2009. So the market was essentially at the bottom. So I'm a really great market timer. So the market's going up, but like I'm not happy with my double-digit returns. I feel like I need more, right? And I'm seeing all these individual stocks that are, you know, going to the moon. So I did like 10 minutes of research and I buy a individual stock. I put in a few tens of thousands of dollars. So not a nominal amount of money. And I remember I went to play golf, and by the time I had got past like 9 holes, the stock was down like 30%. I didn't even know what like an earnings call was. And I was like, what happened? So like they had an earnings call, it went terrible. And I'll never forget, like the next week I ended up selling the stock, and I to this day I won't look at the stock, don't know what it's doing, don't really care. But it was such a lesson for me, and not so much like how to invest money and whether you invest in individual stocks or not, but just more so on the fear of missing out and how it can completely derail your financial plan. And ultimately, like we talk about diversification a lot, and like diversification is the epitome of, at any point you're going to be frustrated that you didn't own more of that and you owned less of this thing.
That is a good one. I have a bunch of clients that we were looking at reviews, and I was like, wait, you had a taxable account somewhere with WeWork stock? Like, I think you're gonna have to call into Fidelity and let them know to like close out the position now, and like let's take this loss. So I think a lot of people can relate. I've had a lot of clients with crypto and other things. I think I remembered my point, so I'm going to say it, is that I think in my personal finance, I don't know about you, but like simplicity is like a key to me. I was sitting down with one of my clients this week and I was like, I'm having a hard time understanding what's going on in your guys' position. You have all these lines of credit, then you have this land you own, and then you have this, and then you have this, and you have this. I'm like, I can't even keep it together. Like, I think this year our goal should be, how do we simplify your whole financial life? Because it just is like inflation, like lifestyle inflation. You just add one more thing and you add one more thing and you add one more thing. And all of a sudden, like, you don't even know what's going on in your financial life because you have a million different things going on. So like, to me, that's at the core of what I do, is how do I keep this as simple as possible? I don't think I really have a good mistake, and that's kind of bummed to say, but here's the one that I have that's recent, is that our house is finishing at the end of February. I thought, we didn't get too much control on that, but I emailed them. I was like, hey, you guys said right now it's going to end at the very end of March. Our lease ends mid-March. Like, can you guys make sure this is done? And basically they were like, we don't know. And then they reached out and like, yep, we can get it done by the end of February. And my apartment complex was emailing me in a very, not the best way. They made it seem like if I gave a 60-day notice, I can just get out of my apartment. So I emailed them. I was like, hey, 60-day notice. They're like, oh, I think you misread what we said. It's a 60-day notice and then 2 months of rent you have to pay. So like over $5,000 of added expense. I'm like, wait, you never said that. You told me 60 days notice. They're like, no, like you read this wrong. It's 60 days. I'm like, our lease ends in 3 months, in 3 weeks. Why would I ever pay this? And they're like, well, some people would rather just get out. I'm like, so I'm going to spend an extra $700 to get out of my lease. I'm like, first of all, you didn't tell me this. And on my lease, it says $2,000. And they're like, no, you're wrong. It says that, but part B says 2 months. And I'm like, so I had no idea.
Always read the fine print.
I didn't expect $5,000 extra dollars, but then luckily we went to sell my fiance's car on Friday and we got $4,000 more than we planned. So sometimes things just naturally work out for you, and, we can just move on. And I'm very grateful to be in a position where, like, that, 2 years ago, there's no way I could have found $5,000, or 3 years ago. And now it's not a worry. And so I'm just, I think looking back, like, some of the best things that you can do by growing your income and managing your finances is these things don't become like huge drainers, right? Like a few years ago, this would have ruined my month, ruined a lot of time. I'd have been scrambling to figure it out. And now it's like, that's an inconvenience, but whatever, we're moving to a new house and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, I think if there's two takeaways for me from everything that we've talked about for everybody tuning in today, I think one is the simplistic nature of it. Thomas, you talked about it, but you can, as you hear us talk about our financial lives, we're not talking about, 10 different properties we have here and this wild investment we have here and this other cash flowing thing that we're hoping works out. It's very succinct in how we're thinking about managing our own money, which is ultimately what I try to do for clients. Because much to your point, Thomas, I think we spend decades adding complexity to our lives only to spend the last few decades trying to simplify everything. And then the other part of it is you want to create optionality, but that optionality needs to be specific to you and your situation. So although somebody might manage their money one way and that might be a great way for them to manage it, you need to understand that money is specific to you and you need to figure out how you can create optionality for you in your own life.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Jake, man, this was a really fun episode. I'm having a blast with you as my co-host this season. I think this is turning out really well. And again, everybody, we just really are grateful for you listening. I look at the numbers and this podcast is, really growing. I look back and we're getting like 3 times the listens we were about a year ago. So thank you everybody for following along. And if you liked it, please rate and subscribe. I mean, we're really trying to climb up and get to close to 100 5-star reviews. We're almost half the way there. So we just would be really grateful if you take the time to do that. But thank you for listening, and we'll see you back next week.